Okay, thank you for joining us for the Discourse. Maybe more than most things, you've been sorely misinformed, miseducated regarding what the word silence actually means. You've been taught generally that there are sounds and there's language and there's natural sounds and there's boom boom and everything else. And the absence of that is silence. There's noise and there's silence. There's things that make sounds and then no sound is silence. That's unfortunate that that's the definition you've lived with. Because silence, just like I've repeatedly, almost continuously said, that the words God, the words reality, the words truth, and many others are all exactly synonymous. They refer to exactly the same thing. They're not aspects, they're not different forms, they're not slightly nuanced, and it almost means that, but not quite. They mean exactly the same thing. They're just different words for the same thing. Just like paint and pigment can mean the same thing. Another word that means exactly the same as those, the same as God, the same as truth, the same as reality, the same as how some traditions use the word self with a capital S. Another word that is exactly referring to the same thing is silence. And once you've been so thoroughly miseducated, it's hard to come around to an understanding of the actual definition, the significant definition, the meaning that has meaning. Because if you're taught that silence means no noise, that's far, far away from silence is God. Silence is truth. Silence is truth and silence is God because A, it is, and B, because the communication of God, the communication of truth, the expression of God, the expression of truth, the expression of reality is silence itself. It's both it and its expression, it and its manifestation. So for some of you, I think that's easy to wrap your head around. You've heard it before. You're familiar with the correct definition, which is essentially a spiritual definition. And for a few, it may be something you've never heard before. And most of you, I think, are somewhere in between. You've heard it from me, at least, if not from others. And you're kind of digesting it and experiencing it and adjusting yourself that silence, correct use of the word silence is not to indicate the absence of noise or sound. So you should also understand that silence is the language of existence. It isn't that existence or God or truth is silent, meaning expressing nothing, saying nothing, communicating nothing. It isn't that it's a sanctimonious silence. That silence is the ultimate language. It is constant expression, ceaseless expression. If you think the way you've been taught to think about language, you can, which is not correct either, but nevertheless for now, you can think about it as if someone were talking nonstop forever. That's silence. Someone expressing ceaselessly, something expressing endlessly. That's why it's eternal silence, it's infinite silence. And the way we tend to be conditioned, it helps you get a better sense of the actual silence when you are in a more noiseless position. But it's certainly not required, and it's certainly the case that when you're truly more, not even totally, just more in tune with silence, then you can hear the silence in the midst of any and all noise. Then you hear that all sound is occurring within the background of silence. The same way that when you read a book, your eyes focus on the print, the ink, the black letters or gray letters, and you disregard the paper it's printed on. Your mind doesn't think paper, even semi-consciously. Your mind does think consciously or semi-consciously words, written words. You are aware that you're reading, which means you're aware that you're reading written words. It means you have an awareness of the black ink, but you forget all about the white page. Silence is the white page. If the white page weren't behind the black ink, you couldn't perceive the black ink. The words would not be readable to you by your eyes. The same way, every word you hear anyone speak, every sound your ears take in from anywhere in any dimension, even inner sounds, not just outer ones, are the black inks, the marks on the page, and silence is the page, the white page background, but it's actually not a background. The analogy only holds to give you a starting point. Beyond that, it doesn't hold, because all sound and all language and all expression and all meaning comes from silence. Because silence is the true language. Silence is the ultimate and highest, most and most superior method of communicating anything. When people are deeply in love, what they notice really deeply in love, and usually at the beginning, it changes later. People notice right away, and they usually relate to it as a profound, particularly profound experience, that they stop having to talk, they stop having to use words. They're just lost in the bliss and the thrill of being in the same room together, whether they're holding hands or not. Just to be together is so fulfilling, so thrilling, but also silence enters in somehow, and they feel they're communicating all the time, just with a glance, or even just without looking at each other, feeling each other's presence, and that they don't feel, oh, we're not communicating or expressing to each other because we're so thrilled that we're just enjoying the emotion or the feeling of it or the experience of it. They actually have an experience of we're communicating directly with each other even more accurately, without words, without gestures, without even looking at each other. We're communicating through silence. Lovers are always saying we're communicating silently. If you've never been in love, it's hard to understand. If you've never been profoundly, deeply swept away in romantic love, which is all a delusion, but that's a different topic. Nevertheless, the experience is fun. If you've never had that experience, then you don't have an easy frame of reference for that description. If you have, then it may be very familiar to you. Either way, silence is not nothing spoken. Silence speaks ceaselessly. And richly, because silent speaking is not the way you and I speak. It isn't full of trivia, full of nonsense, full of things that don't need to be expressed or communicated. When silence is expressing, and silence is always expressing, it's always expressing the great profundity of all. It's always expressing the supreme, the ultimate. It's never expressing a thought. That's mind and ego. It's never expressing an idea. That's also mind, and that's abstract. And one step removed. It's never expressing an intention or an emotion, because that's antecedent to that which is superior. The superior would have to lower itself, and the superior doesn't do that. So it isn't expressing, in other words, it can't be anthropomorphized. It isn't expressing how we express or what we tend to express. And it isn't communicating for the purposes that typically human beings communicate. It is ceaselessly expressing and endlessly communicating because it's truth itself, because it's God for real, because that's the nature of it. The nature of silence is profound, ultimate, constant expression, communication. One expression of silence is life itself. So this doesn't have layers, but it has, let's say, embedded. There's different understandings about what it represents, what it is, what it means, and what it is. And one of them is life itself is a process that comes from silence. Existence itself is synonymous with silence. Existence, God, truth, reality, self, highest self, eternal self, the infinity of the all. All of that, same, different terms for the same as what we mean when we say silence. And one of the ways you enjoy satsang, one of the reasons you enjoy satsang, is because somehow, through the agency of satsang itself, you walk in or log out and immediately silence seems more palpable to you. You sense something, you feel something that you don't feel otherwise. You ascribe it to the environment, usually, meaning the environment of satsang. You ascribe it to satsang. But a more accurate, specific attribution would be it's due to the silence of satsang. Silence somehow is more present in satsang, or we're more able to be aware of it when satsang is occurring. Satsang and silence are almost synonymous, but not quite. highly related, but not synonymous. In my view. Somebody else might say they are, but they'd have to be not me, because I don't say that. I'd rather make it practical, because you use satsang. You don't view satsang as always present until you've really, really advanced quite far. Because it's not your experience that satsang is everywhere. You have the tendency, and it's not a bad, terrible thing, to localize it as it's present at satsang and not anywhere else. It's present whenever I feel a profound presence, or when God is more palpable, or when truth is more accessible to me, then I feel it. And I call that satsang, and that's fine. But it's not the true operation, it's not the true definition. But it's useful, I think. Sometimes it's more useful to not be 100% accurate for the sake of understanding. So when you are more able to perceive the silence, whenever, wherever, however, that's exactly the same as being more able to sense how satsang is present outside of a meeting of people called satsang. And satsang, from the Sanskrit, is translated literally as gathering in truth, gathering for truth. And all gathering for truth is a silent gathering, no matter how many words are used. Because truth cannot be expressed in words. It can, however, be felt in silence. God cannot be described or alluded to in words, but can, however, be experienced in and as silence. Reality cannot be objectified in language and categorized and parsed and discussed, because reality isn't discussable. It can't be expressed in words, because the nature of it is silence. And because the attempt to describe in words actually veers away from truth itself. Words also, besides having the power to communicate, have the power to obscure and confuse and lead away from. So the more reality is communicated through the language of silence, the more accurate the communication. The more God is expressed through the medium of silence, the more accurate the expression. Language, words, human expression, non-silent, linguistic, word-based, which means mind-based, which means idea-based and conceptual, human expression, will always have the aspect of veering away from actual God and actual truth and ground reality. It can't be otherwise. If you dip into water, there will always be wet. It can't be otherwise. They're not separable. There can't be water without wet. And you can't take a step away from truth other than to start speaking about it. But we still benefit by speaking about it. We still enhance our understanding. We still gain in our comprehension and our being able to move toward it. So we're not meaning to imply in any way that words should be gotten rid of, that languages suck and should be thrown out, that only silence should be the mode. We're saying something much deeper, actually. We're saying that whenever you use words, the actual communication is happening through the language of silence, between the words, behind the words, around the words. That silence is the only language of this existence. That what we define as language and conceptualize as language is in fact literally a form of silence. But that has the odd property, because of the conceptual mind-based nature of it, of tending to move away from silence, away from the truth of things. It's very odd, but so. There's not a problem as long as, and this takes a little bit of effort and self-reminding, as long as we remind ourselves, remember, whenever we're speaking in language, whenever we're using sound-based words, written words, whenever we're using language that we're used to remember that it both expresses and clears up, but when it comes to truth itself, it obfuscates, declarifies, makes it more removed. That you can't get through God. You can't get to God linguistically. And there actually are, believe it or not. And you can see how this delusion occurs. There actually are very sincere and committed theologians, people who are committed to the profession of theology, who spend their high intelligence trying to theologize, which means conceptualize God. It's a futile attempt. Of course, they don't know that. Because the more the theology gets rarefied and perfected, the closer it comes to truth, the more it ensures to veer away. It's like when you put a magnet in this hand, a magnet in that hand, start moving them together, they seem to go, and at a certain point, you can't go any closer. The force of both acts oppositely and pushes one or the other, depending which arm is stronger. But you can't get them together. You can't have their surfaces touch. Even if you get them really close, at the last second, they'll veer off. It's just like that. Language, the language of theology, no matter how sincere and well-intended, will always end up sooner or later veering away from what's the true attempt. The attempt to get to God through proper understanding will always veer off into misunderstanding, no matter what. You can't get to God theologically. You can get to a rarefied mind concept of God, and God is not a concept. So, even going far into it, you're way off. You can't get to bananas by eating tomatoes. Not an elegant analogy, but it says what I want to say. So the task for all seekers of any ilk, of any kind, for any purpose that involves true seeking, true spiritual endeavor, always includes, whether they know it or not, becoming more attuned to silence, the real silence, becoming more sensitive to the silence that pervades, becoming more aware of the white page instead of solely the black letters. Switching your perceptive focus. So when you listen to me, just the same as any speaker who's commanded by God to speak, of course you think you're hearing words. Of course it is an experience of listening to someone using ordinary language. But you have a very different experience than the ordinary language when you sit in a college class, when you talk to the cashier at the supermarket, when you hail a taxi cab, when you talk to your mother, your father, your brother. It's not the same experience for most of us. And the reason is because the God-commanded person is actually not speaking in words. The words are a device, a way to encourage you to listen, because if no words were used, you'd likely not be interested. Because you come to get something, and you're conditioned to believe that it can only be gotten if somebody says something. So it has to be done in a way that will work for you, because I'm not speaking for me, and I'm not speaking to hear the sound of my own voice, and I'm not speaking to the air, I'm speaking to you. The only purpose is you. So there's nothing wrong with understanding it, that the speaking is so that the silence can be doing the expression. So that silence can be speaking to you, so that silence can more and more enter you, so that you can attune yourself more to silence. And the relationship between master and disciple is a tuning fork, is you are more and more attenuating, more and more attuning yourself, consciously or not, to the vibration of the Guru, to that pitch, to that frequency. That's the transformation. That's the magic of discipleship. That's how, it's not really magic. It's a very, very specific process. Just the way a tuning fork and tuning an instrument, using it is not magic. But if you don't know anything about music and tuning forks, it can seem like magic. And in the sense that that is a God-given process, I'm happy to call it magic. Because to me, mystic and magic are not far apart words. To me, magic does not mean hocus pocus or a trick of perception. To me, the word magic is very close to mystic. To me, the word magic, and it's my own identification. I'm not suggesting you have it. I'm just sharing how it is for me. For me, the word magic always means God-given. So the more you perceive it, good, and if you don't perceive it at all, just as good. As long as you're listening. When you hear me speak, I get to communicate silence to you, whether you know it or not. It's not important that you know it, but it may help with the attuning, and it is the task of every true spiritual seeker to attune to silence more and more, to the degree possible, and over time becomes, like everything else with practice, better and better at it, more possible. And at some point, silence starts to stick to you, starts to be around you, easily flows towards you, because you've more and more silenced yourself, more and more stepped away from the mind dialogue, inner dialogue, which is just a conceptual one. May seem to you like an emotion, to some people it seems like an emotional dialogue, but it's still conceptual, because every emotion has a thought behind it. So as you move forward, as you progress, as you advance, as you get more clear, with every further transformation, you become more able for silence to reach you. And that's exactly what happens. Silence starts to come around in different ways. And you have different experiences that you may or may not relate to the presence of silence or the accessing of the silence that is always there, always so, always everything. And even that is highly significant, whether you sense it as silence or call it silence, however you perceive it, experience it, fine. But understand that it's never not about silence. It's never not about more and more silence. It's never not about plunging further into silence. This is a perfect example how language obfuscates, because plunge into silence is a correct characterization, but that suggests, because of language, that it's a descent, and the plunge into silence is an ascending, not a descending. You don't descend into silence, you ascend into silence. Language can't capture it. Human language can't tie off every knot. But silence never doesn't tie off every knot. Silence is always perfect communication. Exact, 100% accurate expression. Never veers off, never miscommunicates, never obscures. If an obscuring happens, that's our non-silence leaking in. God has no interest in obscuring. God has no interest in playing tricks. Truth has no interest in hiding. It's not hide and seek. Oh, see if you can find me. Truth is not playing with you. All is present, all is available, all is openly so, always. Your receptivity determines everything regarding your experience. The absolute direct experience of God is always right here, right now, and your receptivity determines whether That's your experience or something other than. So only those who are representing the spiritual itself, trying to speak about the actuality, are likely to ever speak to you about silence. Otherwise, it doesn't come up. Otherwise, the rest of the speaking world isn't interested in that subject as that. Nor do they have to be, nor should they be. That's their business, but we're talking about your business. We're not comparing to the general population. We're only talking about you who want God, you who want truth. So for you, it's vital to understand about silence. For you, it does mean something. For someone who's not interested, it means nothing, and there's no point in discussing. But we're discussing, you and me. This isn't being broadcast on the FM channel for anyone who accidentally tunes in. So just for fun, for however long it feels right, I'm going to speak to you in silence. The rest of the discourse, maybe I'll say something in regular words. At some point, maybe I won't. But from this point, let's see if you can tune in more directly. And to help you do that, tune in more directly to the silence, I can simply start speaking to you silently instead of this method of using regular words. I don't have to use regular words to speak it. I can. Every God-commanded speaker has the ability to speak directly through silence, as silence, with silence. My recommendation is that you don't do the typical thing people do in a situation like this of close your eyes and get meditative. Don't close your eyes. Don't get meditative. Be normal. Be as you typically are. Be as you are when you're walking down the street, driving the car, eating a sandwich. I meant those separately, not doing all those at the same time. Because if you close your eyes, you tend to sail away. And I want you to really see if you can tune into silence rather than sail away in some drifty, airy-fairy version that your mind will say, this is silence, and it won't be silence. It'll be a dreamy thing. So don't close your eyes. And it is of value. It is better. It does help to actually look directly at the God-commanded one. It does help to look at the Guru, gaze at the Guru. Again, not going into a stare or a hazy, not to drift away, because silence isn't away. So whether I close my eyes or not, you can do whatever you want. You want to close your eyes? Close your eyes. But I'm giving you the ideal recommendation on how to have best conditions for tuning in for real to the silence that's communicatable, transmittable, always present, always offered, and we'll just see. And I can tell you that it will get more intense if you tune in, and that will not be only because you're tuning in more successfully, also because I'm not doing this just for fun. I will intensify as I speak silently. It will, from my end, get louder. I'll speak in a louder voice silently. And if you're really sensitive, it will intensify at your end. You'll hear it more loud. That will feel like an upping of intensity. Here we go. I'm going to stop there, because if I amplify it more, it jumps to another level that shifts things in a way you have to be for sure ready for. And I'm a conservative guy. I take no chances. I don't want anybody needlessly uncomfortable. Or just evoking a headache needlessly. You can also get a hell of a headache by that bump up. Maybe another time we'll cross that bridge, but for tonight, it's good to leave it here. Plus, I don't want a headache either. So the right understanding is you are always in the process of more and more trying to attune properly to the silence that pervades, the silence which is all. That's simply the natural movement of life, especially sentient conscious life. Whatever else you're doing, and whatever else you make of it, you are trying to attune to silence, so that that language and that experience and that presence are all better comprehended and absorbed and experienced. Maybe it's because I was talking about silence, but an entirely new term that hasn't come out before got used, the God-commanded one. So remember, I said to you the other night, I've said it many times over the years, that there aren't big qualifiers for being in the guru chair. It's only a few. One, and I described two, but having said the two, let me be sure to add the third so nobody thinks there are only two. A, you must be a devotee of someone or something. B, you must never, for even a fraction of a second, have had the thought, idea, or desire to be the guru. But the most essential one, those are all essential, but somehow more essential, is you must be commanded directly by God to take on that function, perform that role, do that service. It must be a literal and direct, and that's always exactly, without any confusion, how it's experienced, as a direct command from God. Now, to show you how naive I am, I really believed when that command came that nobody knows about this. Nobody knows that the guru is the recipient of a specific command by and from God. And then, of course, when I was reading more and more Sivananda, because I wanted to give you the Sivananda handouts, he talks about the guru is the guru because God commanded him or her to be the guru. That's the first time I've run across it, other than in my own experience. But of course, I've read it in numerous places since then, from numerous sources. It's not a secret. Nobody's trying to hide it. But I really thought initially that this is not in a book somewhere, that God commands people, ordinary human beings who happen to be devotees, who've never for a second desired to be the guru. God commands them to do it. And lo and behold, it's well known, and it's all kinds of places, and it's been so for how many thousands of years, I don't know. But there are no others. There are no other requirements. It's those three only. That's the whole list. Nothing else. You don't even have to be good at it, or good at public speaking, or good at transmitting silence, because God takes care of all of it. If those three elements have occurred, then it means that particular individual is simply usable. Shouldn't be given much significance other than that. No special powers are required. No extra gifts are required. The guru isn't superior to you. They're simply the guru because they were God commanded to be the guru. You may be God's commanded someday. You think I ever imagined for a second I'd be God commanded of all things to be the guru? Wow. I would have laid a lot of money and given you huge odds against that one. So, don't be so quick to think it could never be you. I would have certainly said it could never be me, but it didn't come up in my mind because I would never think that way, because it could never be me. But silence has to have some kind of voice that you'll listen to first. And the voice you're most attuned to initially is another human voice. But when the human being is God commanded as guru and speaking, the human being isn't speaking. God is speaking. The human being is incidental, is usable, happens to be there because of the practical usability, the utility, not required, simply utilitarian, simply better for you. Because if it was invisible and silent, you probably wouldn't attend a satsang being given by an invisible silence. You kind of assume there's a chair and a person in it, and for that reason, God accommodates that to get you in the door. I'm not trying to get you in the door, but God is. So I am the door. When the silence becomes deafening, then you know, and more often deafening, then you know that you are getting better attuned. You will inevitably, if you get better attuned, pass through a deafening silence experience or phase where that's the typical experience. where the silence will sound so loud to you that it might as well be 1,000 marching bands. And 1,000 marching bands are all playing because of silence. The sound you hear from 1,000 marching bands at once is an expression of silence. In fact, nothing, never anything is not an expression of silence. You are an expression of silence. Wherever you're sitting, that room, that house, that block, that city is an expression of silence. This world, this universe, this eternity, this infinity is an expression of silence. Because silence and truth are the same. Silence and God are the same. Silence and reality are one and the same. And that's just so. There's nothing to theologize about, argue about, debate about, or characterize. It's only factually so. All the debating and all the arguing is mind. All the wanting to explain and wanting to know the explanation is mind. Mind knows nothing of silence. Silence is beyond the mind, before the mind, without the mind. No mind is needed for silence. And in fact, mind is an expression of silence, but a very noisy one. So, just understand, anything you look at, it's silence. Anything you see, it's silence. Anything you hear, it's silence. Anything you think, it's silence. Anything you feel, it's silence. Anything that happens, it's silence. Behind everything, as everything, in everything, it's silence. Nothing is not silence. All is silence. Only silence is. Only silence ever was. Only silence ever will be. That becomes more crystal clear to you the more you attune to silence. Prayer is silence, and silence is prayer. When you become maximally attuned to silence, you become the prayer. Silence is the sacred itself. In all directions, silence, silence, silence. Silence is the fullest expression, the clearest communication, and the most that can be said, and includes all that cannot be said. Words have limitations, language has limitations, the human mind has limitations, silence has no limitation. How can God have a limitation? How can truth have a limitation? So I've spoken many times, not regularly, but often enough about silence. And tonight I've spoken more fully, more specifically about that subject. And probably even will more so on future occasions. So if it's a boring subject for you, you need to let me know. But I don't think it is. On a completely unrelated note, having nothing to do with this discourse, I want to give you some new information. First of all, I want to thank you for your support of this Los Angeles Center in Reseda. And I want to inform you that we're moving it. It isn't going to be, as of September 1, in Reseda anymore. It isn't going to be this house, and it won't be in the model, in the form that we've done this center. It was great for 2 years. Been here as of September 1, 2 years. The majority of you are not in the valley. The center will be located in Los Angeles, West Los Angeles, and will be hosted. Rather than ICODA has a center in Los Angeles, ICODA's center in Los Angeles will be hosted by your friend and mine, Devaraj, who has offered his home as the new center. He owns a property in Los Angeles. That's his central location. He's been living at the center, but hasn't sold or given up his property, and he's going to move back to that property and take the rest of us with him. Kind and generous soul that he is. So those of you who live in the city or nearer to the city than to the valley, it'll be more convenient, hopefully. And those of you who live in the valley, what can I say? You'll have to drive longer. So the official move is September 1st. We begin operating in the House of Devaraj. It sounds like a fancy fashion place. We begin operating in the House of Devaraj on the 1st, but we will have a kind of ceremonial sanctification, just like we did here, just like this location was at a certain point sanctified both by me and, to my great and unending surprise, by God, which happened separately. I was told earlier that that would happen on September 17th, but now I'm being told it's the 16th, which is, in fact, a Friday. And that will be a fun gathering and ceremonial event that we'll do at 7 p.m. that Friday, September 16th. So we want everyone and anyone who can possibly physically get there to be there, because it's going to be a big celebration and a real sanctification. Having this location, due to the blessing of this location, I learned how to sanctify. I did not know how to do that before we moved in to this location. Apparently I had the ability, but I didn't know. So something told me this location should be sanctified, and somehow I knew what to do it, and oh my God, it worked. I was shocked. It's always shocking when you have abilities you didn't know you had. And then a literal miracle happened. God walked into the center. I don't know when that was. We have the date written down somewhere, but it was months and months after that. It wasn't contiguous or related to the Guru sanctifying the center. It was God's decision. I didn't ask for it. Wasn't part of it. I was shocked, amazed, surprised, and wowed. But when God walks in, thank God I have the ability to know who it is. I'm sure there's been plenty of times that I missed it, but not this one. So hopefully, if he's listening, he's invited to sanctify Devaraj's house, the new center, at his convenience. No pressure. But I can tell you that being present for an actual act of sanctification is a high blessing, and I encourage you to be present because it flows to you. When you're present, it flows to you in a way it cannot and will not if you are not physically present. It can still flow to you. You can be present online, and that's great, but it will not be as potent or absorbable as much. That much I know about this process of sanctification, that those present benefit. Those physically present, those who are within 30 feet of the actual sanctification process benefit greatly. 40 feet, not quite as good. Try to be within 30 feet. About the length of 3 people laying down, roughly. That's how I experience it. So I'm roughing that as 30 feet. It's 3 10-foot people, obviously. Outside of 30 feet, almost as good. Maybe 95%, but not quite as beneficial. Okay, I'll repeat it when we have our big holiday celebration Friday, because not everybody is, even though there's many people at this discourse tonight, everybody of course isn't here and they won't all hear it, and I want to repeat it, and we'll continue to repeat it for this last month we're at this property, so that people don't show up the first week of September knocking on the door thinking that we have been taken away by aliens, space aliens came down and removed us from here. We're on some other planet having satsang. Well, we will be on another planet. It's called Los Angeles, West Los Angeles. That's almost another planet. But you can go there easily. And if you have questions, other questions or concerns about the move, nothing is changing, by the way. All the programs same, every event, same schedule, everything. All the same, except in different location. And the fact that it's Devaraj's house, so you have to be nice and not track in mud or bring your pets. Be nice to Devaraj because he's being very generous to host the ICODA Center in his own home. Here, it wasn't anybody's home. At this location, it was just the ICODA Center. But now the ICODA Center will be in someone's home, so act accordingly. I want Devaraj not to be upset. Do not urinate in his basement. Treat it as nicely as you've treated this facility and this center. It's the same. It's the same. Just a different address. In fact, once it's formally sanctified, I think you'll be shocked at how much it'll feel exactly the same, like we didn't even move. Because the energy, the sanctification releases and brings in the same, it's the same energy. That energy is quite specific. It's not just whatever happens. So you'll see. So the ones who live closer to the city will be jumping for joy, and the ones who live in the valley will be upset. And what's a boy going to do? It's the way it is. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is permanently located anywhere forever. And we're happy for this move. So, the satsang of the guru and the disciple is the satsang that involves the guru and the disciple meeting in silence. Understand it more.